They say that as you get older, you begin to understand what loneliness is. I am 73, and I understood it much earlier. My name is Eli Prescott. I am the owner of the Old Fireplace restaurant in Yakima, the city where I have lived my entire life. It's a place where the temperature rises to 38 degrees in the summer and can drop to -20 in the winter. It's a town where every other person knows your name, but not everyone knows your story. My restaurant has been on North Front Street for 28 years. At first, it was a small cafe that I opened with my Adeline. She was such a good cook that people came from 100 miles away to try her famous apple pie. I still remember her hands, small, always covered in flour, with thin veins protruding like rivers on a map of our life together. Adeline died 11 years ago. Lung cancer. She never smoked, but she said that 30 years of breathing in my cigarette smoke was enough. After she died, I quit smoking, but it was too late. Our only son, Sean, was working as an accountant in Seattle at the time. He came to the funeral with his wife, Raven, whom I had only seen twice before, at their wedding and at Christmas 4 years ago. Even then, I sensed that she was not the kind of woman who would appreciate life in a small town, or a man who had spent his entire life building a family restaurant. "You should move, Mr. Prescott," she said to me at the wake, holding a glass of wine that I had personally filled for her. "This house is too big for one person, and the restaurant, well, maybe it's time to take a break? At your age, you need peace and quiet." I was only 62 at the time, and I didn't want peace at all. Sean was quiet that day. The pain of losing his mother had not yet left him, but I could see him glancing at his watch, nervously checking his phone. I remember wondering at that moment who was more important to him, his late mother or messages from clients. After the funeral, they stayed for 2 days. Raven kept talking about how boring it was here, how outdated everything was, and how she couldn't wait to get back to civilization. She didn't understand that for me, civilization was the ability to go out into the backyard and pick an apple from a tree that I had planted 35 years ago with Adelina. After they left, our communication was reduced to greeting cards on holidays and rare phone calls, which I always initiated. Sean only called when absolutely necessary, when he needed my tax number or when he wanted to know what I had done with my mother's silver. It hurt to realize that my son, whom I had taught to ride a bike and read bedtime stories to, had become such a stranger. But then again, I always knew that children leave. I just didn't think they would go so far away that I couldn't reach them. I continued to run the restaurant. After Adeline's death, I hired a chef, Thomas Redding, who had previously worked at a prestigious establishment in Chicago. He loved our little restaurant and thought it had soul. And I knew that soul was Adeline, who was still present in every detail of the interior, in every recipe. Over the years, the Old Fireplace became famous, not only in Yakima, but throughout the state of Washington. We received several awards and were featured in tourist guidebooks. The business was thriving, and I was secretly proud of what I had created. But I didn't tell my son about it. 3 years ago, Sean called me with the news that he had been promoted to CFO at his firm. I congratulated him and offered to send him money to buy a new suit. He laughed into the phone. "Dad, no offense, but my wardrobe is worth more than your restaurant." I said nothing. He didn't know that in addition to the Old Fireplace, I owned 3 other buildings in downtown Yakima that I rented out. He didn't know that after Adelina's death, I had invested a significant amount in stocks that had grown fivefold. He didn't know that his old father's fortune was in the 7 figures. I deliberately maintained the image of an aging restaurateur who was barely making ends meet. I wore worn corduroy jackets, drove an old Ford, and complained about taxes and utility bills. I don't know why I did it. I guess I wanted to see if my son loved me not for what I could give him, but just for who I was. It turned out he didn't. Our relationship with Sean grew colder and colder. He called once a month, spoke hurriedly, always in a rush, and I listened to him talk about his success in Seattle, how he and Raven had bought a new house, how they had vacationed in the Maldives, how they had bought a second car, an SUV for the weekends. And it seemed to me that he was telling me all this on purpose to make me feel like a failure. Last year, Raven posted a photo on social media with the caption, "Christmas dinner with the family." The photo showed her, Sean, and Raven's parents. I wasn't invited. When I called my son and asked why, he said they thought I would be busy at the restaurant because the holidays are a busy time. "Maybe next time, Dad," he said without much enthusiasm. That evening, I got drunk for the first time in many years. I sat alone in my big empty house and drank whiskey that I had been saving for a special occasion. I guess realizing that you become a stranger to your own child is a special occasion. A week after that Christmas, I rewrote my will. I had previously planned to leave everything to Sean, the restaurant, real estate, stocks, but now most of the inheritance was to go toward establishing the Adeline Prescott Culinary School. I left Sean only the house and a small amount of money, enough to show that I hadn't forgotten him, but not enough to change his life. My lawyer, Ernest Holloway, who had been my friend for 40 years, shook his head as I signed the new documents. "Are you sure, Eli?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "More than sure," I replied. "My son thinks I'm a failure, and so does his wife. Let it be so, at least until I die." Ernest knew my family's history. He knew how I started out with a small snack bar, how I worked 16 hours a day to turn it into a restaurant, how I scrimped and saved to pay for Sean's education at a prestigious university, how proud I was of him when he graduated. "You could just tell him the truth," Ernest suggested. "Why? So he'll start respecting me just because of the money? So his wife will suddenly fall in love with me?" "No, my friend, that's not the kind of love I need." After that conversation, I decided to live as if I had no son. I focused on the restaurant, on my regular customers who, over the years, had become closer to me than my own family. I enjoyed the simple things: a cup of coffee at dawn, a fresh newspaper, conversations with Thomas about new recipes, walks in the park where I once walked with Adelina. And only sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, would I take out the old family album and look at the photos of little Sean sitting on my shoulders, of us fishing together, of him at 5 years old, helping Adeline roll out the dough for a pie. And then I would ask myself, when did it all go wrong? When did my boy turn into a stranger? I couldn't find the answer. Maybe it was Raven and her ambitions. Maybe I missed something in his upbringing. Or maybe it's just life, which rarely turns out the way we plan. 2 weeks ago, Sean called me and said that he and Raven were coming to Yakima for the weekend. He's turning 40 and wants to celebrate in his hometown. "We could have dinner together, Dad," he said. "Saturday, 7 o'clock. Do you know of any decent restaurants in Yakima?" I almost laughed into the phone. My son was asking me, the owner of one of the best restaurants in the area, if I knew of a decent place to have dinner. "Yeah," I replied. "There is a place, the Old Fireplace. I'll make a reservation." "Oh, is that your restaurant?" His voice sounded surprised, as if he had forgotten what I had been doing all my life. "I hope the food is good. Raven is very picky about food." "Don't worry," I said. "I'm sure even your wife will find something she likes." After that conversation, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking out the window at the garden where my son used to play. I thought about the upcoming meeting, what I would say to him, how I would behave, and I decided that I would try one last time to find in him the boy I once loved more than anything else in the world. My son's 40th birthday. It's a strange feeling when your child reaches such a significant milestone. 40 is the age when a person has already established themselves and found their place in life. At least that's how it should be. But I still remember Sean as a little boy who asked me to teach him how to ride a bike and fly a kite. The day before the festive dinner, I arrived at the Old Fireplace earlier than usual. I wanted to personally supervise all the preparations. This dinner was important to me. It wasn't that I hoped to win back the affection of my son and his wife. No, with age, you lose your illusions. But I wanted to do everything in my power to make this evening special. After all, I didn't have much time left to fix anything. Thomas, my chef, met me in the kitchen with his usual cup of strong coffee. "Did you come early to check on the preparations for tomorrow's dinner?" he asked, handing me the coffee. "Yes, I want to make sure everything is perfect," I replied, taking the cup. "Don't worry, Mr. Prescott. I personally designed the menu. Your son and his wife will be delighted." I just nodded. Thomas was a good chef, but even he couldn't fix what had broken between Sean and me. I walked through the kitchen to the main dining room. My manager, Ray, was already there, giving instructions to the staff on how to arrange the tables. "Boss," he nodded to me, "I've reserved the best table by the window, as you requested. Mountain view, quiet location. Everything will be ready by 7 o'clock tomorrow evening." "Thanks, Ray. Make sure Sam serves all of us. He's the most experienced." "Of course," Ray paused, then asked cautiously, Is it true that your son doesn't even know this is your restaurant? I sighed. The staff at the old fireplace were my second family, and there was little to hide here. It's not that he doesn't know. It's more that he doesn't care. To him, it's just an old-fashioned place that I continue to run for some reason, instead of selling it and moving to Florida or wherever old people go. Ray shook his head but said nothing. That was his strength. He knew when to keep quiet. I spent the whole day in the restaurant, lost in memories. My mind kept returning to the moment when Sean introduced me to Raven. It was 8 years ago, shortly after Adeline's death. He brought her to Yakima for Christmas, and from the very first moment, I sensed the coldness emanating from her. A smile that didn't reach her eyes, polite questions that showed no interest, a condescending tone when she spoke to me, as if I were not the father of her future husband, but an elderly patient in a nursing home. But Sean looked at her with loving eyes, and I, trying to support my son during a difficult period in his life, did not express my concerns. Perhaps I was wrong. After their wedding, where I felt more like a necessary accessory than a valued guest, Sean began to call less and less often. Every year, our conversations became shorter and more formal. I realized I was losing my son, but I didn't know how to fix it. The strangest thing was that Sean never asked how I was doing financially. Maybe he thought that since I wasn't complaining, everything was fine. Or maybe he just didn't care. Not to mention Raven, who, I'm sure, thought I was a hopeless failure, clinging to an old restaurant on the outskirts of town. If only they knew that the old fireplace brought me an income that many in Yakima could only dream of. That in addition to the restaurant, I have real estate and investments that I wisely invested with the help of my old friend Ernest. But I saw no point in telling them about it. If my son isn't interested in me as a person, why should he know about my wealth? I returned home that evening and lay awake for a long time, going over tomorrow's events in my head. What would I say to Sean? What would I say to Raven? Should I try again to repair our relationship, or simply accept the fact that my son is lost to me? The next morning I woke up with a heavy heart. Looking in the mirror, I saw a tired 73-year-old man with deep wrinkles and gray hair that had long since lost its thickness. But there was still life in his eyes and that spark that Adelina once called my trademark. Well, old man, I said to my reflection, you're not as useless as they think. I spent the whole day at the restaurant checking every little detail. I had wrapped Sean's gift, an expensive Swiss watch, a week ago. It wasn't that I expected him to appreciate it. It was more of a tribute to tradition. A father should give his son a birthday present. By 6 o'clock in the evening, everything was ready. The table was set, the wine was open to breathe, and the air was filled with the aromas of freshly cooked food. I sat down at the table and waited. Sean and Raven were 20 minutes late. When I saw them through the restaurant window, I was startled by the surprise. My son looked older than I remembered him. There were early gray hairs at his temples, and the wrinkles around his eyes had deepened. Raven, on the other hand, looked younger than her age. Flawless makeup, stylish clothes, neat hairstyle. She held her husband's hand, but there was no warmth in this gesture, only a demonstration of belonging. They entered the restaurant, and Ray escorted them to my table. Sean smiled at me. That polite smile you usually give to people you don't know very well. Hi, Dad. He leaned over and gave me a quick hug. Long time no see. Hello, Mr. Prescott. Raven held out her hand to shake mine. Her fingers were cold and stiff, like a statue's. Sean, Raven, I nodded to them. Glad you could make it. Happy birthday, son. We sat down at the table, and I noticed Raven scanning the room with an appraising gaze. A barely perceptible grimace of disapproval appeared on her face. Nice place, she said in a tone that clearly contradicted her words. So authentic. Yes, not much has changed here in recent years, I replied. But the food is excellent, believe me. Sean looked a little embarrassed. He picked up the menu and began to study it with exaggerated interest. So what are you doing now, Dad? He asked without looking up from the menu. Still working at the restaurant? I almost laughed. My son didn't even remember that I owned the restaurant, not just worked there. Yes, I'm still involved with the old fireplace, I replied. It keeps me on my toes. How's your job? Are you still the CFO at the same company? Yes, same as always, Sean nodded. Although I'm considering an offer from another firm. The salary is 30% higher, plus stock options. Raven perked up noticeably. They're offering us a corporate apartment in downtown Seattle, she added, and membership in a country club. We're just thinking about whether to accept. I nodded, not knowing what to say. For them, career and status symbols were everything, but I had long since lost interest in such things. An awkward pause ensued, broken by the waiter Sam, who approached us. "Good evening," he greeted us. "Are you ready to order?" "I'll have a medium-rare steak and a glass of your best red wine," Sean said without even asking my opinion. "I'll have the salmon salad and white wine," Raven said, closing the menu and handing it to the waiter without looking at him. "And for you, sir?" Sam turned to me, a spark of recognition flashing in his eyes. He knew who I was, but he maintained the legend professionally. "The same as my son," I replied, "and please bring us a bottle of champagne. We are celebrating an anniversary after all." "Of course, sir." Sam nodded and left. "So," I turned to Sean, 40 years old, a big milestone. How does it feel?" Sean shrugged. "To be honest, I don't feel any different. It's just another day." 40 was an important age for me," I said, trying to find common ground. "That's when I decided it was time to expand the restaurant." "Yes, I remember," Sean nodded, but it was clear that he wasn't very interested. "How's your health, by the way? Everything okay?" The question sounded formal, without sincere concern, as if he were asking about the weather. "At my age, something always hurts," I smiled, "but overall, not bad. The doctor says I'm in great shape for a 73-year-old. "That's good," Sean nodded again. "Have you thought about maybe moving somewhere warmer or into a nursing home?" Raven perked up noticeably. "Yes, Mr. Prescott. There are wonderful facilities that provide a full range of services for people your age. My aunt recently moved into one, and she's very happy. No worries, everything is included in the price." I felt irritation building inside me. They were talking to me as if I were a frail old man, incapable of taking care of myself. "Thank you for your concern," I replied curtly, "but I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I have a restaurant that keeps me on my toes and a house that I know like the back of my hand." "But Dad," Sean leaned toward me, "this can't go on forever. You understand that sooner or later you'll have to think about, well, the next stage." "Death, you mean?" I looked him straight in the eye. Sean looked embarrassed. "No, not at all. Just about organizing your life so that you're comfortable. And so you don't have to worry about me," I added. There was an awkward pause. Sam returned with the champagne and began to open the bottle. "We have a special occasion today," he said. "Your son's birthday. Let me congratulate you, sir." He nodded to Sean. "And wish you all the best." Sean smiled tensely. "Thank you." Sam poured the champagne into glasses and left. I raised my glass. "To your health, son, and to success in your career." We clinked glasses and drank. The champagne was excellent. I had ordered it especially for the occasion. "So," Raven took a sip and put her glass on the table, "how are things in Yakima? Still boring?" "For some people, maybe," I replied, "but I find everything I need here." "But there's nothing here." Raven shook her head. "No decent shops. No restaurants." Sean gave his wife a warning look, but she continued. "I mean, of course, places like this. They're cute, very authentic. But you have to admit, Mr. Prescott, Yakima is stuck in the last century." "In a way, that's its charm," I replied calmly, though inside I was beginning to boil. "Not everyone appreciates only the new and shiny." "But progress is a good thing, right?" Raven continued, oblivious to the tension. "Take Sean, for example. He grew up here, but he managed to break out and build a successful career in the real world." Breakout, as if Yakima were a prison, not the place where I raised my son and gave him everything I could. "Everyone has their own path," I said, "and their own idea of happiness." The waiter brought the appetizers, and the conversation was interrupted for a moment. I looked at my son and his wife, people who were so foreign to me, and thought that this might be our last family dinner. There was tension in the air, like before a storm. I didn't know how the evening would end, but something told me there would be a storm, and a very strong one. The steaks were impeccable. Thomas had outdone himself. Juicy meat with a fragrant crust, grilled vegetables, baked potatoes. Everything was perfect. Even Raven, who usually barely touched her food, ate her entire salmon salad without hesitation. "I have to admit, Dad," Sean said, wiping his lips with a napkin, The choice of restaurant is excellent. I didn't expect to eat so well in Yakima. I smiled modestly. It's nice when your work is appreciated, even if they don't know it's yours. I told you the food here was excellent. Yes, it's quite decent. Raven nodded, but her tone clearly didn't match her words. Although, of course, it can't compare to Le Bernardin in New York. We were there last month, and that's real haute cuisine. Sean shot his wife a quick warning glance, but she didn't seem to notice. Dad, thanks for the watch. Sean raised his hand, showing off my gift on his wrist. It's really nice. It must have cost you a pretty penny. Don't mention it, I waved him off. It's not every day you turn 40. Still, Sean continued, you shouldn't have spent so much. I know you're not doing too well financially. I'm fine, I interrupted him. Don't worry. But the restaurant business isn't doing so well right now, Raven interjected, especially in such provincial places. My colleague does analytics in this field, and he says, really, I'm fine, I repeated more firmly this time. You have nothing to worry about. Raven shrugged and took a sip of wine. I noticed that the bottle was almost empty, and my sister-in-law's cheeks were slightly flushed. The alcohol made her even more straightforward. Mr. Prescott, she said, leaning toward me across the table, I certainly understand your pride. It's a quality worthy of respect. But Sean and I would have no trouble, well, you know, supporting you if the need arose. After all, we're family. I looked at my son. He looked a little embarrassed, but he didn't object to his wife. That's very kind of you, I said, struggling to remain calm. But I repeat, I'm fine. There was an awkward pause. I glanced around the restaurant. The dining room was almost full. We always have a lot of visitors on Saturday evenings. Some of them are regulars who knew me personally. They sometimes noticed me and nodded in greeting. But tonight I was trying to be inconspicuous. It was Sean's night, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. At that moment, the restaurant door opened, and an elderly man in worn clothes entered. I recognized him immediately. It was Harold Fisk, a local homeless man. He was about 60, but he looked much older. Life on the streets spares no one. He used to be a math teacher at a local school, but after his wife died of cancer and medical bills ruined the family, he lost his home and his job. Harold sometimes came in on particularly cold evenings. I let him sit by the fireplace and even treated him to soup or a cup of hot tea. He never begged, never bothered the visitors. He just sat quietly in the corner, warming himself, and then left just as quietly. And now when he came in, trying to be inconspicuous, I just nodded slightly to him. Harold nodded gratefully in response and headed for his usual spot in the corner of the hall. But Raven noticed him. Her eyes narrowed and her lips pressed into a thin line. Who's this ragamuffin? She asked loudly enough for people at neighboring tables to turn around. Do they let just anyone in here? I felt anger rising inside me, but I tried to remain calm. That's Harold. He sometimes comes in to warm up. Warm up? Raven snorted. In a restaurant? What if he starts harassing customers or stealing from the tables? He never does that, I said. Harold is a decent man. He's just had some bad luck in life. All homeless people say that, Raven shook her head. And then it turns out that they are to blame for their own problems. Alcohol, drugs, laziness. Raven, Sean tried to stop her, but she was too agitated to listen. No, Sean, she raised her hand, stopping her husband. This is outrageous. We came to the restaurant to celebrate your birthday, not to sit surrounded by homeless people. Her voice grew louder. The patrons at the neighboring tables were already openly watching the events unfold. Raven, please. Sean put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Let's not make a scene. A scene, she turned to him. I'm not making a scene. The restaurant management is making a scene by allowing all kinds of trash to come in and scare decent customers. Harold, hearing this, cringed in his corner. His face expressed shame and embarrassment. I felt sorry for him. He's not scaring anyone, I said, no longer hiding my irritation. He's just sitting quietly in the corner. You don't understand, Raven turned her gaze to me. People like that ruin the reputation of the establishment. I work in marketing and I know exactly what I'm talking about. With that, she raised her hand and snapped her fingers, beckoning the waiter. Sam, who had been watching the situation, quickly approached our table. How can I help you, ma'am? He asked politely, although I could see in his eyes that he was tense. Can you explain to me? Raven began in a tone full of superiority. Why your restaurant allows vagrants to sit here? It's a violation of all health regulations. Sam glanced questioningly at me. I shook my head slightly, suggesting he not get too involved. Ma'am, Mr. Fisk is a regular customer, Sam replied diplomatically. He never causes any trouble. Regular customer? Raven laughed. He can't even afford soup. Or do you feed all the homeless people in town for free? Raven, Sean tried to intervene again, but she was already furious. Sean, this is unacceptable. We came to a restaurant, not a homeless shelter. I demand that you kick this beggar out immediately. She turned to the waiter, almost shouting, Get him out of here, now! Silence fell over the room. All eyes were on our table. Harold began to slowly get up, preparing to leave without causing a scene. I was shaking with anger. This man whom she so contemptuously called a beggar was once a respected member of society, a teacher who had helped many children in this city. He did not deserve such treatment, and certainly not in my restaurant. Sam, I said, trying to remain calm, please offer Mr. Fisk a cup of hot tea and the soup of the day. On me. Raven stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise and anger. What are you doing? She asked. Are you encouraging this begging? I'm treating a good man to dinner, I replied, and it's none of your business. None of my business? She raised her voice again. This is ruining the whole evening. Who are you to decide who can and can't come into the restaurant? Sam, who had remained professionally calm until that moment, couldn't take it anymore. Ma'am, he said firmly, Mr. Prescott doesn't dictate who can enter the restaurant. He owns it. There was a deathly silence. Raven froze, her mouth slightly open and her eyes wide. She slowly shifted her gaze from Sam to me. What did you say? She asked in a hoarse voice. The old fireplace has belonged to Mr. Prescott for 28 years, Sam continued. He's not just a regular customer, he's the owner. Sean looked as if he had been hit over the head. He stared at me with disbelief and confusion. Dad? His voice trembled. Is that true? I nodded. Yes, Sean. It's my restaurant. I thought you knew. But you never said. You never asked, I replied simply. Raven, who had finally come to her senses, quickly changed tactics. Her face, distorted with anger a second ago, suddenly took on an expression of sincere remorse. It was almost comical how quickly she could change her mask. Mr. Prescott, she began, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. I didn't know. I apologize for my behavior. I didn't expect. It's such a beautiful establishment. And you thought I was just an old man barely making ends meet, I finished for her, and that you could boss me around just like you bossed my son around. Sean flinched as if he had been struck. Dad, that's not true. Raven didn't mean to offend you or this man. She was just concerned about the standards of the restaurant. Standards? I smiled bitterly. Standards of humanity? Compassion? Or just how things look on the surface? Raven grabbed a napkin and began nervously crumpling it in her hands. Mr. Prescott, please accept my apologies. I was out of my mind. It's been a rough day. I had too much wine. No need to make excuses, I interrupted her. What we see under the influence of alcohol is often the most honest version of ourselves. Sean looked increasingly upset. Dad, let's not ruin the evening, okay? Raven apologized, and I'm sure she really is sorry. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Her face showed remorse, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. She was assessing the damage and figuring out how to minimize it. I'd like to make it up to you, Raven said, leaning toward me. Maybe we could invite you to Seattle next weekend. Sean will show you our new house. We'll go to the opera. The opera? I couldn't help but chuckle. You think an invitation to the opera will make up for what you just demonstrated? Your true feelings not only towards me, but also towards a person who is in trouble? Raven was embarrassed, but quickly recovered. I just want to do something nice for you, Mr. Prescott, to show how much I respect you. Now you respect me, I clarified. Now that you know I own a restaurant. She lowered her eyes but said nothing. What could she say? We both knew the truth. I turned and saw that Sam had already brought Harold a cup of tea and a large bowl of soup. The old man nodded gratefully at me across the room, and I nodded back. There was more dignity in that simple exchange of gestures than in all of Raven's false remorse. I turned back to my son and his wife. Raven, your apology is accepted, I said evenly. But please don't pretend that you suddenly have respect for me. We both know that's not true. Sean looked completely lost. He shifted his gaze from me to Raven and back, not knowing whose side to take. Dad, he began uncertainly, I think Raven is truly sorry. And so am I. I should have paid more attention to what was going on in your life. It just always seemed like you had everything under control and didn't need our help. I don't, I replied, but there's a difference between needing help and wanting to be a part of your son's life. That seemed to hit a nerve. He looked down. I know we haven't talked much lately. Lately? I shook my head. Sean, for the last 6 years, you've only called me on holidays and not even then consistently. You've never invited me to your house. You haven't asked how I'm doing after Mom died or if I need help with the restaurant. You just disappeared from my life. That's not true, he protested, but without much conviction. I was just busy with work, a new house, and me, Raven interjected, clearly trying to soften the situation with her smile. I probably took up too much of Sean's attention. You know how it is in the early years of marriage. I looked at her. She was trying to look sweet and remorseful, but I could see only calculation in her eyes. She was afraid that I might disinherit Sean after such a scandal, and she was trying to make amends. The early years of marriage? I asked. You've been married for 7 years, Raven, and for all those 7 years, you looked down on me. Don't deny it. I saw it in every glance, heard it in every word. She started to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. No need. I'm not looking for excuses or explanations. I'm just stating a fact. You never respected me. You considered me a burden, a failure, a person who didn't deserve your attention. And only now, when you found out that I'm not as poor as you thought, you suddenly started apologizing and offering your friendship. Raven turned pale. Her mask began to crack, revealing the anger beneath it. That's not fair, she said, her voice trembling. You're judging me without even knowing me. I know enough, I replied. I saw how you reacted to a person who, in your opinion, is worthless. That says more about you than all your words ever could. Sean looked increasingly uncomfortable. He clearly wasn't used to seeing his wife in this light and didn't know how to react. Dad, let's not make a scene, he said quietly. It's my birthday, and I'd just like to enjoy it. I looked at my son. There was a plea in his eyes. He didn't want to choose between me and Raven. He wanted everything to be smooth, without conflict. But sometimes conflict is necessary to see the truth. Of course, Sean, I said finally. Let's just finish dinner. Raven visibly relaxed, thinking the storm had passed. But she was wrong. I was just getting started. After the incident with Harold, a tense silence fell over the table. Sean picked at his dessert, chocolate mousse with raspberries, without looking up. Raven periodically glanced at me with concern, apparently trying to figure out how badly she had damaged her relationship with her father-in-law, who suddenly turned out to be not such a poor relative after all. Her calculating mind, I'm sure, was already working out a new strategy. I calmly ate my dessert, thinking about my next move. A strange sense of relief came over me after all the cards were on the table. For so many years, I had worn the mask of a modest old man who lived for his restaurant that I had almost begun to believe in this legend myself. But now that Raven had torn off the mask of her feigned respect, I felt that I no longer needed to pretend either. You know, I broke the silence, pushing away my empty plate. It's funny how one phrase can change a person's attitude. One phrase, he owns a restaurant, and suddenly I went from being a burden to a valued member of the family. Raven flinched as if she had been struck. Mr. Prescott, I never considered you a burden, she said hastily. This is a misunderstanding. Enough, Raven, I said, raising my hand in a stopping gesture. We both know the truth. For the past 7 years, every time we met, you looked at me like I was something stuck to the sole of your designer shoe. Every word, every gesture said, you're a failure who doesn't deserve to be part of our successful life. Sean finally raised his head. His eyes showed confusion and something else. Guilt? Shame? Dad, you're exaggerating. Raven always treated me like I was invisible, I finished for him. And you, Sean, allowed her to do that. My son looked away. He knew I was right, but he didn't want to admit it. It was too painful to face the truth. You know what's the saddest part? I continued. Not that your wife didn't respect me. After all, I'm not her daughter. But that you, my only son, let her push you away from me. You took her side without even thinking about it. I didn't take sides, Sean objected. That's just how life turned out. I have my job. Raven has her things to do. There's not even enough time for... To call your father once a month? I interrupted him. To ask how the man who raised you alone after your mother died is doing? Who paid for your college education, your first car, your wedding? Raven shifted in her chair. I saw her nervously fiddling with her napkin. Mr. Prescott, she began in a conciliatory tone, we all make mistakes. I admit that I may not have been as attentive to you as I should have been, but we can fix everything. Now that we know you own this wonderful restaurant, we could... That's exactly the problem, Raven, I smiled. Now that we know, you're willing to change your attitude toward me just because you found out I'm not as poor as you thought. Her face flushed slightly. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what I meant. I shook my head. And you know what's interesting? The old fireplace is just the tip of the iceberg. I saw her eyes widen. Sean also sat up straight in his chair, his attention completely focused on me. What do you mean, Dad? He asked. I took a sip of water, pausing for effect. An agonizing pause during which I saw a greedy gleam flash in Raven's eyes. I mean that, in addition to the old fireplace, I own 3 other buildings in the city center that I rent out. I mean that after your mother died, I invested a significant amount of money in stocks that are now worth 5 times as much. I mean, the old man you were worried about becoming a burden to you has a 7-figure fortune. I said it calmly without boasting, simply stating a fact. But the effect was impressive. Raven froze, her mouth slightly open. Sean looked as if he had been slapped in the face. But, but why didn't you ever tell us? He asked, finally finding his voice. Why should I? I shrugged. So you would love me for my money? So your wife would suddenly have respect for me that I didn't deserve as a person, but deserved as a wallet? No, son. I wanted you to love me just because I'm your father. But it turns out you didn't need me. Raven quickly regained her composure. Her eyes darted around, clearly assessing the new situation. Mr. Prescott, that's not fair, she said, trying to make her voice sound sincere. We've always appreciated you. It's just, well, you preferred to live modestly, and we respected your choice. We didn't want to intrude on your life. I laughed. I couldn't help myself. Didn't want to intrude? You? The woman who half an hour ago was trying to tell me who I could let into my own restaurant? Raven, you should have gone into acting, not marketing. You have talent. Her face flushed again, but this time with anger. The mask began to crack. I was trying to be polite, she hissed, but you seem to be looking for a confrontation. Not a confrontation. I shook my head. The truth. I've been silent for too long, letting you think I'm someone I'm not, and I've watched for too long as you've distanced my son from me. I looked at Sean. He looked confused, like a man who had suddenly discovered that he had been living in a matrix his whole life. Sean, I said, softening my tone, I don't blame you. You fell under the influence of a powerful woman. It happens. But I want you to know that all these years, I've been waiting for you to remember that you have a father who loves you no matter what. Sean swallowed. Tears glistened in his eyes. Dad, I don't know what to say. I really didn't think that you felt rejected. It's just that life got crazy, and you forgot that family isn't just your wife, I finished for him. I understand, and I'm not asking you to choose between me and Raven. I just want you to know the truth. What truth? Raven interrupted, no longer hiding her irritation. That you've been playing the role of a poor relative all these years, when in fact you were rich? And now you're accusing us of not appreciating you? No, Raven, I looked her straight in the eye. The truth that money doesn't make a person valuable. That true wealth is relationships, family, the things you so easily threw away. She snorted. How pretentious. I don't think you're in a position to lecture us about the value of family, considering you hid your true financial situation from your son. I didn't hide it, I objected. I just didn't advertise it. Sean never asked how I was doing financially. He wasn't interested. And if he had asked, I would have answered honestly. Sean lowered his head. I could see that my words had hurt him. He knew I was right. And you know what's the saddest thing, son? I continued more gently. You stopped coming to Yakima not because you were busy. It was because you were ashamed of me, of your old father who lives in a small town and runs a restaurant. You were ashamed to introduce me to your colleagues and friends. You didn't invite me to your housewarming or office parties because I didn't fit into your shiny new world. Sean looked up at me, his eyes full of pain. That's not true, Dad. I've never been ashamed of you. Then why haven't you invited me to your house once in the last 5 years? Why haven't you introduced me to your friends? Why did you even prefer to go to Raven's parents' house for Christmas instead of mine? He didn't know how to respond. Raven tapped her fingers nervously on the table. Sean, we have to go, she said, glancing at her watch. We have an early flight tomorrow. I smirked. Sure, run away. That's what you do best when the conversation gets uncomfortable. We're not running away, Raven snapped. We do have an early flight tomorrow, and we need to get some sleep. Raven's right, Dad, Sean agreed with his wife. We really have to go, but we can continue this conversation later. When everyone has cooled down a bit, I nodded. They had already told me everything I wanted to hear. With their silence and their hasty excuses, they only confirmed what I already knew. I was a nuisance to them, an uncomfortable reminder of the past. But now that they knew about my condition, the situation had changed, and that was the saddest discovery of the evening. Of course, leave, I said, but before you do, I want you to know something else. They froze, already halfway out of their seats. Raven's eyes flashed with concern, while Sean just looked tired. Next week, I'm meeting with my lawyer, Ernest Holloway. We're going to discuss my will. Raven sat back down abruptly, her eyes fixed on me like two drills. Your will, she asked, trying to sound casual. But you're in great shape, Mr. Prescott. Why think about such things now? At my age, you have to be prepared for anything, I replied calmly, and I want my affairs to be in order. And what are you planning to do? She asked cautiously, as if treading on a minefield. That's a personal matter. I allowed myself a small smile. But don't worry, I won't leave Sean without an inheritance. He's my son, no matter what. The relief that flashed across her face was almost comical, but it quickly turned to wariness. What do you mean, no matter what? She asked. It means that even though he hasn't been the best son in recent years, I still love him. I looked at Sean, who seemed to want to sink through the floor. And I hope that one day he'll remember what it means to be a family. Sean swallowed. Dad, No need, son. I raised my hand, stopping him. Don't say anything you don't mean. I don't need empty promises. Raven seemed to relax a little when she heard that Sean would not be completely disinherited. But there was still anxiety in her eyes. She was clearly calculating how much, no matter what, might cost in dollars. Mr. Prescott, she began softly, I know tonight has been tense, but I hope we can put all that behind us and start over. As a family, I looked at her for a long moment. You're not my family, Raven. You're my son's wife. And the only reason you're talking about starting over right now is because you found out about my condition? That's not fair, she exclaimed, her mask of politeness finally cracking completely. You're judging me without knowing anything. I know enough, I replied calmly. I've seen how you've treated me all these years, how you've talked down to me, how you've ignored my calls and letters, how you advised Sean to stay away from me. Oh, yes, I know about it, I added, seeing her surprised look. Yakima is a small town. People talk. Sean looked as if he had been punched in the gut. Raven, he turned to his wife. Did you really tell me to stay away from my father? She blushed but quickly regained her composure. I just said we need to focus on our life in Seattle, on your career, on our future. Your father was doing fine on his own, and I didn't see the need. The need to maintain a relationship with a man you thought was worthless, I finished for her. But now that you know I have money, suddenly there's a need to start over. Raven pressed her lips together so tightly they turned white. Her eyes flashed. You deliberately twisted everything to turn me against Sean, she hissed. You were always against our marriage. No, Raven, I shook my head. I was never against your marriage. I was against the way you influenced my son, distancing him from me. And today I finally saw that my fears were justified. Sean looked from me to his wife and back again. He was clearly trying to process everything he had learned that evening. About my condition, about how Raven had manipulated him, about how he had allowed himself to drift away from me. "Dad," he said finally, "I don't know what to say. I really didn't realize it was this serious." "I know, son," I nodded. "And I don't blame you, but now you know the truth, and it's up to you to decide what to do with it." Raven stood up abruptly. "Sean, we have to go," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "We have an early flight in the morning, and we still need to pack." Sean looked at her, then at me. I could see the inner struggle in his eyes. "Yes, we have to go," he finally said, getting up. "Dad, we'll talk later, okay?" I nodded. "Of course, son. I'll be waiting." Raven was already heading for the door without saying goodbye. Sean lingered for a second, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. A mixture of guilt, confusion, and perhaps realization. "Happy birthday, son," I said quietly. "I hope that at 40 you'll start seeing things as they really are, not as Raven wants them to be." He nodded without saying a word and followed his wife. I watched them leave the restaurant, and a strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in many years, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't pretending. I was just being myself, Eli Prescott, a man who had finally spoken his mind. Sam approached the table after they left. "Are you all right, Mr. Prescott?" he asked with genuine concern. "Yes, Sam," I smiled. "For the first time in a long time, everything is really okay." The week after that ill-fated dinner dragged on slowly. I returned to my usual routine, opening the restaurant in the morning, talking to suppliers, checking the accounts. But something inside me had changed. It was as if the weight I had been carrying for years had disappeared, and it was easier to breathe. On Wednesday morning, as I was checking the delivery of fresh fish, Ray approached me with the phone. "Boss, your son is on the line." I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone, not knowing what to expect. Part of me hoped that Sean had finally understood everything, but another part, more cynical, born of years of disappointment, said, "Don't get your hopes up." "Good morning, Sean," I said in an even voice. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded uncertain. "How are you?" "Fine, how are you?" I... Raven and I thought a lot after our dinner. He paused. "Dad, I wanted to apologize. I didn't realize that my absence hurt you so much." I closed my eyes. Behind the seemingly sincere words, I could sense rehearsal. It was as if Sean had prepared for this conversation, carefully choosing his words. "I'm glad you realize that," I replied neutrally. "Raven and I talked about it, and she feels terrible about what happened too," he continued. "She never meant to hurt you. It's just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. How easy it was to reduce 7 years of neglect to one vague word. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Interesting definition. Sean cleared his throat, sensing my sarcasm. "Dad, we really want to make things right. Raven had a great idea. Why don't you come visit us in Seattle next weekend? We'll show you our house, take you to some nice restaurants. You could stay for a week or even longer." I smiled to myself. How conveniently she changes her position. "Sean, be honest. Was it Raven who suggested inviting me?" I asked directly. "Yes, actually." He hesitated. "She's very upset about how things turned out." "And that has nothing to do with the fact that she now knows about my financial situation?" My question sounded sharper than I intended. There was a pause. I could almost see Sean on the other end of the line trying to formulate an answer that wouldn't reveal Raven's true intentions. "Dad, you're being unfair," he finally said. "Raven genuinely wants to mend things. Your money has nothing to do with it." "Then why didn't she try to mend our relationship before? For 7 years, Sean. For 7 years, she looked down on me. And now she's suddenly concerned about family ties? People change, Dad." His voice became defensive. "She realized a lot after our conversation. Give her a chance." I sighed. I didn't want to argue with my son, but I didn't have the energy to pretend either. "Okay, Sean, I'll think about visiting Seattle. Thanks for the invitation." After our conversation, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking out at Yakima Street. The invitation to Seattle was too transparent an attempt by Raven to win back my favor. Now that she knew about my money, I had suddenly become a welcome guest in their home. The thought was bitter. Thomas, noticing my pensive state, came over and handed me a cup of coffee. Bad news, boss. No, not bad. I took the cup. Just predictable. Thomas nodded understandingly. Over the years we had worked together, we had sometimes talked about my family, and he knew enough not to ask unnecessary questions. Do you know what's good about the restaurant business? I asked, taking a sip. Everything is genuine here. Either people like your food or they don't. There's no pretense. Except for complaints about the quality of the food to get a discount. Thomas grinned. Yes, except for that, I smiled. But there are a few such cases. Mostly people come here for a real experience, not fake smiles. I put down my cup. Okay, back to work. I needed to check the accounts for the last month, but thoughts of Sean's call stayed with me all day. I imagined him and Raven discussing their strategy for getting back into my life, how she probably explained to him the importance of maintaining a good relationship with me, now that my money could be part of their future. In the evening when I got home, I poured myself some whiskey and sat down in the chair Adeline loved to sit in. Sometimes I talked to her as if she could hear me. You know, dear, I said to the silence of the room, our boy never learned to see through people. He's too trusting, or too in love to notice the obvious. I took a sip. The whiskey burned my throat with a pleasant warmth. Remember how we dreamed about our old age? How we would babysit our grandchildren and get together for family dinners? I smiled bitterly. Instead, I sit alone in an empty house, and my own son only calls me because his wife found out about my money. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the photo of Adeline on the mantelpiece. She was smiling her warm smile that could always melt my heart. You would know what to do, I sighed. You always found the right words. I spent the rest of the evening looking through old family albums. Here was Sean on his first bike, with a proud smile and a bandage on his knee. Here were the three of us on a picnic by the lake, Adeline laughing, shielding her face from the sun. Here was Sean receiving his college diploma, hugging us both gratefully. When did we lose that closeness? When did my boy become this stranger who calls at his wife's urging? I closed the album, feeling a heaviness in my chest. Maybe Sean really wants to repair our relationship. Maybe I should give him a chance. But the next day, all my doubts were dispelled. An email from Raven arrived at the restaurant. Ray, who usually handled the mail, handed it to me with a surprised look on his face. It's from your sister-in-law, boss. She's asking about investing in the old fireplace. I opened the email. Raven wrote that after our fruitful conversation, she had thought a lot about the potential of the family business. She suggested considering expanding the restaurant, creating a chain, maybe even a franchise. With my marketing experience and your culinary talents, we could make Old Fireplace a national brand, she wrote. I laughed, unable to contain myself. Ray looked at me curiously. Something funny, boss? Yes, Ray. I shook my head. Just confirmation of what I already knew. I deleted the email without replying. Raven wasn't interested in me as a person. She was interested in my money and my business. 2 days later, Sean called again. This time his voice sounded more insistent. Dad, did you get the email from Raven? She told me about her idea for expanding the restaurant. I did, I replied briefly. And what do you think? I think it's a great idea. The Old Fireplace could become a big brand, not just a local attraction. I mentally noted how quickly Sean had picked up Raven's rhetoric. Sean, I said calmly, I don't want to turn the Old Fireplace into a chain. It's a family restaurant, a place with soul. Not everything in life has to be scaled up and maximized for profit. But Dad, just imagine the possibilities. Raven has already contacted several investors who... Investors? I interrupted him. She's looking for investors for my restaurant? Without my knowledge? Sean hesitated. No, not exactly. She was just testing the waters, finding out who might be interested, to prepare all the options for you. Sean, my voice became firm, tell Raven that I'm not interested in her proposal. The Old Fireplace will remain as it is, and I don't need investors. But Dad! No, Sean, that's my final answer. After that conversation, I decided to meet with Ernest Holloway, my lawyer and old friend. We needed to discuss the changes I was planning to make to my will, but I also wanted to consult with him about how best to distance myself from Raven without completely losing touch with my son. Ernest welcomed me into his office, a cozy room with bookshelves and a view of the park. Eli, he shook my hand. It's good to see you. How was Sean's anniversary? Informative, I smiled. Raven finally found out that I own a restaurant, and that I'm not as poor as she thought. Ernest shook his head. And now she's suddenly interested in repairing the relationship. What's more, she wants to invest in the old fireplace and turn it into a national chain. I told him about the letter and my conversation with Sean. Ernest took off his glasses and wiped them, as he always did when he was annoyed. Predictable, but still unpleasant, he said. What do you plan to do? I sighed. Distance myself. From Raven, definitely. But I don't want to lose Sean completely, even though he seems to be blindly following his wife's lead. Do you think he really doesn't see that she's manipulating him? Or does he just prefer to turn a blind eye? I don't know, Ernest. I shook my head. Maybe a little of both. He's always been vulnerable. After Adeline's death, he especially needed female care. And Raven, for all her faults, filled that void. Ernest nodded. And now it's hard to admit that the person you trusted with your life may not be who he claims to be. Exactly, I agreed. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend I don't see her true motives. And you shouldn't, Ernest leaned forward. Eli, you've worked tirelessly your whole life. You built a successful business, amassed a fortune. You deserve to spend the rest of your life surrounded by people who value you, not your bank account. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. You know what's the saddest thing, Ernest? I always imagined that in my old age I would be surrounded by family. Grandchildren who would come to me for advice. Sunday dinners with all my loved ones. But instead, you have a restaurant full of people who respect you, Ernest concluded. Employees who have become your second family. Customers who appreciate what you've created. That's family too, Eli. Just a different kind. I smiled, touched by his words. You're right. And yet, sometimes I regret that Adeline didn't live to see these days. She would have known how to get Sean back. Ernest put his hand on my shoulder. Adeline was a wise woman, but even she couldn't change what a person doesn't want to see. Sean has to realize for himself what he's lost. We moved on to discussing the will. I decided to leave Sean the house and a small amount of money, enough to show that I hadn't forgotten him, but not enough to change his life. I planned to put most of my fortune into a trust to create a culinary school named after Adelina, and to bequeath the old fireplace to Thomas and Ray, who had worked with me for many years and understood the value of this place. Are you sure about the restaurant? Ernest asked, taking notes. Sean might take it as a final rejection. I thought about it. Did I really want to completely deprive my son of his inheritance? Maybe I should give him a chance. Let's leave this point open for now, I decided. I'll think about it some more. The day after my meeting with Ernest, another letter arrived at the restaurant, this time from Sean. He wrote that he and Raven were very disappointed by my refusal to consider the business expansion proposal, but that they respected my decision. However, he wrote, we still want to build a relationship. Maybe we could start with something smaller. For example, you could give Raven access to the restaurant's financial documents so she can prepare a marketing analysis. This doesn't commit you to anything, it just gives us a better understanding of the business. I read the letter twice, not believing my eyes. Access to financial documents? A better understanding of the business? They weren't even trying to hide their true intentions. I didn't reply to the letter. Instead, I called Sean directly. Sean, I got your letter, I said when he answered. Yes, Dad. His voice sounded animated. What do you think of the proposal? Raven could... No, Sean, I interrupted him. I will not give Raven access to my business's financial documents. Not now, not ever. But Dad, he protested, how can we build a relationship if you don't trust us? Relationships aren't built on access to bank accounts, I replied firmly. They're built on mutual respect, which I haven't seen from you in years. You're being unfair, his voice turned cold. We're trying to meet you halfway, and you're rejecting every attempt we make. No, Sean, I sighed. You're not trying to build a relationship with me. You're trying to get access to my money. There's a difference. It's Raven, isn't it? His voice became accusatory. You've always disliked her, and now you're using one incident to discredit her in my eyes. I felt anger rising inside me, but I tried to remain calm. Sean, I'm not discrediting Raven. Her actions speak for themselves. 7 years of neglect, then sudden interest after she learned of my financial situation. And now she's asking for access to financial documents. You really don't see a pattern here? There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear Sean's brain working, trying to find an excuse for his wife's actions. You're misunderstanding, he finally said. Raven just wants to help. She has experience in marketing. She could... Sean, I interrupted him again, feeling tired. I'm not going to continue this conversation. My answer is no. No investments, no access to finances, no restaurant chain. I love you, son, but I won't let you or Raven interfere in my business. With that, I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that my son couldn't see the obvious, and relief that I had finally stopped pretending. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Thoughts swirled in my head, memories flooding in one after another. I remembered how I had dreamed that Sean would one day take my place in the restaurant and continue the family business. How I imagined teaching his grandchildren, my grandchildren, the wisdom of cooking. How I hoped that in my twilight years I would be surrounded by the love and care of my family. The reality turned out to be different. My son chose a different path, and his wife saw me only as a source of money. And instead of fighting for the illusion of family happiness, I made a decision to let go. To let go of expectations, to let go of dreams of reunion, to let go of Sean, allowing him to live his own life. It was painful, but it was honest pain, unclouded by pretense and false smiles. And in that honesty, I found a strange comfort. Fall in Yakima has always been my favorite time of year. The air becomes clear and crisp. The apples in the orchards swell with juice, and the vineyards around town are covered with patches of gold and crimson. 3 months had passed since that ill-fated dinner when I finally told Sean and Raven the truth. About myself, about them, about our false family harmony. During those months, Sean called me several more times, at first insistently, then less and less often. The conversations became shorter and colder. He no longer mentioned Raven's business proposals, but he didn't talk about personal matters either. We exchanged information like strangers. The weather, health, city news. Strangers connected only by blood and memories that faded with each passing day. During one of these calls, Sean casually mentioned that Raven was pregnant. I should have felt joy. I was going to be a grandfather. But instead, I felt only bitterness and anxiety. What would this child see? A mother who valued status and money more than human relationships? A father who can't stand up to his wife's manipulation? And a grandfather who will be nothing more than a figurehead called upon to show up on holidays with gifts? After that call, I made my final decision. I had lived in limbo for too long, hoping for a reconciliation that would never come. It was time to move on, and that required concrete action. I called Ernest. I need you to prepare all the documents we discussed, I said, without wasting time on pleasantries. Are you sure, Eli? His voice sounded cautious. This is a serious step. Absolutely, I replied. It's time to stop clinging to illusions. A week later, I was sitting in Ernest's office, signing document after document. The will, the deeds of gift, the documents establishing the trust fund. With each signature, the weight on my shoulders became lighter and my breathing easier. Now all that's left is to tell Sean, Ernest said when the last document was signed. Do you want me to talk to him? I shook my head. No, I'll do it myself. It's my responsibility. That evening, I called my son. Raven answered the phone. Ah, Mr. Prescott, she said, her voice tinged with false cheerfulness. How nice to hear from you. Sean is in the shower, but I can call him. No need, I replied. I'd like to talk to you first, Raven. Me? Surprise mixed with anxiety flashed in her voice. Of course. What would you like to talk about? The future, I said simply. Sean told me about your pregnancy. Congratulations. Thank you. She relaxed noticeably. We're very happy. Sean is already planning the nursery, and I'm thinking about taking a break from work to devote myself entirely to the baby. A wise decision, I nodded, though she couldn't see it. Children need attention, especially in the early years. Exactly. Her voice became more animated. I've always told Sean that family should come first. By the way, we hope you'll visit us after the baby is born. The child needs a grandfather. I smiled. Raven wasted no time in finding a new approach to me through her future grandson. Actually, Raven, that's why I'm calling, I said, keeping my cool. I've made some decisions about the future, and I think you and Sean should know about them. Decisions? Her voice tensed again. What decisions? I've rewritten my will, I replied bluntly, and redistributed my assets. Most of my estate will go toward establishing the Adeline Culinary School. Sean will receive the house and a small amount of money, and I am transferring ownership of the Old Fireplace restaurant to Thomas Redding and Ray Morris, who have worked with me for many years. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Raven's thoughts racing as she searched for the right response. Mr. Prescott, she finally said, her voice tense, I'm not sure I understand. Why did you make this decision? Because I finally realized who my real family is, I replied. They are the people who have been with me all these years, who respect me not for my wallet, but for who I am. But we are your family. Now there was poorly concealed panic in her voice. Sean is your son, I'm his wife, and soon we'll have a child, your grandson or granddaughter. Blood ties don't make people a family, Raven, I said calmly. Actions do. And your actions over the past 7 years have clearly shown that you don't consider me part of your family. Not until you found out about my money. That's not fair, she exclaimed. We were busy. Sean had his job, I had my career. Raven, I interrupted her. Let's not pretend. We both know the truth. You considered me a loser, a burden. And only when you found out I was wealthy did you suddenly want to fix our relationship. Not with me, with my money. I'm going to call Sean, her voice became sharp. He needs to hear this madness. I heard her call her husband, explaining something to him quickly and excitedly. Then Sean picked up the phone. Dad, what's going on? Raven says you rewrote your will? Yes, Sean, I confirmed. I've made a decision about how to dispose of my property, and I think you should know about it in advance. But why? His voice sounded lost. Why now? And why are you disinheriting me? I'm not disinheriting you completely, I corrected him. You will get the house you grew up in and enough money to ensure that you and your family will never want for anything. But the restaurant and the bulk of my estate will go to other causes. Because of what happened at dinner? His voice now sounded hurt. Are you still holding a grudge against us? No, Sean, I sighed. Not because of one incident, because of 7 years of neglect, because you let Raven distance you from me, because you both only remembered I existed when you found out I wasn't as poor as you thought. That's not true, he protested, but his voice sounded unconvincing. Sean, let's be honest with each other, at least now. When was the last time you called me just because, not because Raven told you to? When was the last time you asked how I was doing after Mom died? When was the last time you were interested in my life, not what I could give you? There was silence on the line. I could hear him breathing heavily. I've been busy, he finally said. Work, home, now a kid. We're all busy, Sean, I replied gently. But we make time for those we truly love. I love you, Dad. His voice sounded sincere, and that was the most painful part. It's just that I don't always know how to show it. I know, son, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. And I love you too. I always have and always will. But I can't pretend anymore that everything is fine, that we're a happy family who just don't see each other very often. I deserve better, and so do you, to be honest. What do you mean, he asked warily. I mean you deserve to know the truth about your wife, about how she's been manipulating you all these years, about how she only sees people for what they can give her. Don't talk about Raven like that. His voice became defensive. She loves me, and she cares about our future. Your financial future, I clarified. And yes, I have no doubt that she loves you in her own way. But ask yourself this. If you lost your job, if you lost your home, if everything you had disappeared, would she stay with you? Would she continue to love you? A pauper, unemployed, with no prospects? Sean was silent. I could almost see him struggling with himself, unwilling to admit what he may have known subconsciously for a long time. It's unfair, he finally said quietly, to ask such questions. Life is unfair, son, I replied, but it's better to face the truth than to live in denial. I let myself believe for too long that you would come back into my life, that we would be a family again. But now I've accepted reality, and you should too. So is this the end? His voice sounded desperate. Are you just giving up on us? No, Sean, I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. I'm not giving up on you. I'll always be your father. If you need my help, my advice, my shoulder to cry on, I'll be there. But I'm not going to pretend we have a normal family relationship anymore, and I won't let Raven use me for her financial plans. In the background, I could hear Raven's voice demanding that Sean hand her the phone, but my son seemed to have distanced himself from her. Dad, his voice was quieter, as if he didn't want his wife to hear. I don't know what to say. I never thought it was that serious. I know, son. I felt a surge of tenderness for this lost man who was once my little boy. You always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Including Raven, he asked bluntly. I sighed. That's for you to decide. All I can say is what I saw. And what I saw was a woman who looked down on me for 7 years and then suddenly wanted to mend fences when she found out I was rich. Sean was silent. I heard Raven calling him again, more insistently this time. I have to go, he finally said. Raven, she's very upset. Of course, I said, unsurprised. Goodbye, son. And remember, I love you no matter what. I love you too, Dad, he replied quietly, his voice sounding sincere, mixed with pain. After that conversation, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at Adeline's photo. I wanted to believe that she would have approved of my decision, that she would understand why I couldn't continue to play along with the false family idol. The next day, I returned to work at the restaurant with a strange sense of relief. It was as if a huge weight that I had been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. I no longer had to pretend. I didn't have to hope for a reconciliation that would never happen. I accepted reality, and in that acceptance, I found peace. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Sean. It was short, just a few lines. He wrote that he respected my decision, even though he didn't agree with it, that he loved me and hoped that one day we could rebuild our relationship, that he was expecting a child and wanted me to be part of his life. I replied just as briefly. I wrote that I loved him too, that I held no grudges, and that I would be happy to see him and his child, but only if he came alone, without Raven. He didn't reply to that letter, and I realized that he had made his choice. Life went on. I still opened the restaurant every morning, talked to suppliers, checked the quality of the food, and discussed new dishes for the menu with Thomas. But something had changed. I no longer lived in the past. I didn't cling to memories and hopes. I lived in the present moment, enjoying every day. On Christmas Eve, when the restaurant was full of customers and the air was filled with the aromas of spices and pine needles, Harold Fisk approached me. The same homeless man who had caused the scandal at dinner with Sean and Raven. Mr. Prescott, he said, handing me a small package wrapped in newspaper, I wanted to thank you for your kindness, for standing up for me back then. I was touched. Harold, who was barely making ends meet, had spent his meager funds on a gift for me. You shouldn't have, Harold, I said, accepting the package. I just did what I had to do. Not everyone would have done that, he shook his head. You're a good man, Mr. Prescott, and you deserve happiness. His words touched me deeply. I unwrapped the package and saw a small wooden figure inside, a skillfully carved silhouette of a cook with a ladle in his hand. I carved it myself, Harold said shyly. It's not much, but it's from the heart. It's beautiful, Harold, I said, genuinely impressed. I didn't know you could carve. I can do many things, he shrugged. It's just that life has turned out in such a way that I don't always have the opportunity to show my talents. At that moment, it dawned on me. I called Thomas over. Thomas, I said, how would you feel about taking on an assistant? We've been needing someone to keep the kitchen in order for a long time. Thomas, who knew Harold's story, nodded understandingly. Great idea, boss. We could really use an extra pair of hands. I turned to Harold. What do you say, Harold? The work isn't hard, but it's steady, and will help you with a roof over your head. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Are you serious, Mr. Prescott? Absolutely, I nodded. Everyone deserves a second chance. That evening, when I returned home after closing the restaurant, I didn't feel the usual loneliness. The house was empty, but my heart was not. I thought about Harold, about his joy and gratitude, about Thomas and Ray, who had been with me all these years, about the regular customers who had become almost like friends. Maybe this is what a real family is. Not necessarily connected by blood, but connected by love, respect, and shared values. Maybe I'm not as lonely as I thought. I looked at the photo of Adelina standing on the mantelpiece. You were right, dear, I said quietly. Family is those who stay with you when things get tough. Those who see you as a person, not a walking wallet. And I think I do have a family after all. Just not the one I dreamed of. My heart felt calm. I made a decision that changed my life, and perhaps Sean's too. I let go of my illusions of family happiness with my son and his wife. And in that letting go, I found freedom. Life went on, and it wasn't what I had imagined. But perhaps it was exactly what it was meant to be.